I am Dave Crosland, a.k.a. King Gum, and I have the creative impulse.
This is Jerry.
This is Lane.
This is Dave. And you are listening to the Creative Impulse Podcast.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to the Creative Impulse Podcast. Today we got our guest, Dave Crosland, on there. How you doing, Dave?
Hey, how's it going, Dave? I'm feeling good.
Great to have you on here, Cros. Well, can I call you Cros?
Oh, certainly.
What if he said no?
I don't know what
That
would be very uncomfortable.
That would be really awkward.
I'd probably say anyway. I can't help myself. In the interest of disclosure, I have we wanted to have Cros on the show because we wanted to talk about demystifying what it is to be a freelance artist, to be a guy who's out there on his own, making it as an artist. That's tough. How do you do that? And I've always admired Cros for doing that, so I thought he'd be great to have on the show. But also, I knew Cros. I knew Cros back in high school. He's from Buffalo, and we used to have a lot of fun back in the day. And so I know him as. I could never stand having two Davids around, so I called him Cros because there can only be one Dave at the lunch table.
Yeah, it was like the Highlander thing.
There can be only one.
It was chop my head off or give me a nickname. So of course I went with nickname.
So maybe we could talk about that. Well, first of all, let's ask a little bit about your history, Cros. So how'd you get into being an artist? And can you talk about some of the things your projects that you worked on?
Oh yeah, well, such a long story. But yeah, I mean, I was always drawing as a kid, as a little boy. I have a picture of myself at like 2 years old, like with one of my father's mechanical pencils, like just drawing something with this big, like cheesy grin on my face. So yeah, my parents, I think they picked up on it early on that I was into art. So I always had supplies. Like my dad he's a draftsman, so he would always bring home scrap paper from his office, like big reams of computer paper, just for me to draw on. It was really cool. And I always made sure I had clay and paint. And like I just kept drawing. And I mean, we went to high school together. We were in a technical high school, but I kept drawing comics and doodling. And I think by the time I got into late high school, I realized I wanted to do it professionally. And my parents encouraged me to go to art school. So I went through that, and it's kind of just been this constant in my life. Like I can't really imagine myself not drawing. So that was my start just in making art.
Yeah, I remember when we were in school, we first went to, we checked out a convention of colleges, and there was a school there that you eventually went to.
Oh yeah, the Columbus College of Art and Design.
I thought that was a crazy move then, because you were a top student in science and engineering in high school. Well, our school was a technical high school, and you were prepped for that, right? But you wound up doing art instead.
Yeah, it was kind of interesting because I remember telling teachers like, "Oh, I got into this art school," and like chemistry and physics teachers were like, "What? Huh?" Because everyone thought I was going to become some scientist. Yeah, it would have been cool. Like I really enjoyed science, but I love art, so. I was fortunate enough to go to art school, and it was nuts. It was a whole new world. I got exposed to like different kinds of people, different kinds of art, music, like all that stuff, all those college experiences. But it was really like mind blowing. Just this whole veil was lifted off of what it means to be an artist for me, because I didn't really have any professional artists around me as a kid. I didn't quite have artists to look up to like right next to me, and there was no internet, so. But once I got to college, that really opened the doors.
Was there a whole community of aspiring comic artists in the school? You know what?
It was Columbus, Ohio, and it had a thriving comics community. I'm pretty sure it still does. But yeah, it's weird because now everything's so connected. It's almost hard for me to think back to what it was like back then. But there's definitely a community of people at the school and in the city that were excited about comics, and the funny thing, it's funny you should mention comics because I was very much in a comics mindset in school, but the longer I was there, the more I learned how to do, I learned how to paint, I learned some design, the world just kept broadening, it went from just comics to comics and painting, and then comics, painting, cartoons, so
It's funny. One of the things that it's funny you mentioned that, because one of the things that I noticed about your work, which I mentioned to Jerry, who was just asking the question, Jerry considers you consider yourself more of a cartoonist, right?
Yeah,
Jerry?
that's more where my style falls.
And I consider myself more of an aspiring comic book guy. And it's funny in your work, and you touched on this, and I've heard you touch on this in the past. It seems like you're somewhere in between. You know, I can't say that your work, at least to me, in my perception, you're not a cartoonist and you're not a comic guy. You're something else. You're a hybrid of comic book and a Charles Schultz, like a hybrid of Jack Kirby and a hybrid of a Charles Schultz type cartoonist.
I see Gerald Scarf.
Ah, nice. You hit a nail on the head right there.
Hi, my name is Gerald Scarf. I've been an artist all my life. I suppose you'd call me a cartoonist, a political cartoonist. I've drawn the London Sunday Times for almost 50 years now. Talk about being in a rut, but I mean, it has paid the rent, I guess.
I love his stuff. I found his work in high school, working at the library. I stumbled across a book of Scarf's work.
It goes that far back?
Yeah, oh yeah. Yeah, the influences, they're pretty deep.
It's funny, in high school it's funny, I remember one time you came back to visit one year, and you weren't the same person that I knew in high school in terms of the way that in terms of the way you acted and in terms of sort of art you were making. And I was like, well, where did this guy come from? This guy was making your art was so much more expressive and wild, and so you're telling me that was always there and all this was going on, and I never knew this guy when I was in high school.
No, those things were, I think, buried. God, where did it come from? I think it just was experiences and meeting people and like traveling a little bit more. I think the little spark was always there, and I just needed experiences to kind of blow on it and give it some air, like make it like actually turn into a real ember and eventually a flame.
Another thing I noticed one thing I remember about you, and I believe I can see the result of this, the way that your career has gone, is that you're very regimented in terms of the way you work. Although your work is very expressive, it feels so fluid. I get the sense that you are, just as you were very regulated, meticulous in the way that you approached your studies of science in high school. It seems that you have that same approach to art. Like, how can you speak on that a little bit? How do you juxtaposition that? This kind of precise organization that exists within science and within the way that you manage time with producing fluid artwork.
Oh, I think it all goes hand in hand. I mean, for me, it was going to Hutch Tech, being like such a super like nerd. Like, I must get 100 on this test. Like, I would get pissed if I got a 98 on a test.
I remember.
It was crazy. Oh, yeah. You remember me flipping tables in the cafeteria. But no, honestly, it just taught me work ethic. Like, it taught me, and it taught me to be curious, It's like, about the world, like learning so much about science and engineering. And, I mean, you, believe it or not, you mystified me in school because you were an electrical engineer. Oh. And I would look at your homework and I'm like, what the hell is that? Like, I don't know. I think going and being such a studious, sciencey nerd in high school really, it made me curious. I was always curious about art and how did Stan Winston make those effects? But science made me curious about everything, and that I think that was something that I've kept throughout my life and my career. It's just a curiosity about how things are done in cartoons or in comics or in painting, photography. But as far as the regimented style, it just taught me work ethic. It taught me that sometimes you have to stay up until 2 a.m. to find the answer to this problem, or sometimes it also taught me the cooperation aspect of art. It's everything from calling a friend for advice to calling an editor to talk about working at a schedule. The lessons I learned in high school definitely translate to art, and it's a blend of the structure of creating professionally and on the schedule, but also just the way you think and the way you approach problem solving.
This is an illusion. We'll go back to your influences and that thing in just a moment. But I was thinking about you mentioned our time in high school. I remember the first time I ever saw Pulp Fiction was with you, and it was your fault. You made me go see that movie.
Die, you motherfucker!
I think
Are you
that
blaming me for making you see a cool movie?
back then I was always watching Star Wars and Wrath of Khan and all that junk, and and Transformers. But you said, let's go check out this movie, Pulp Fiction. That seems like that was.
Yeah, he was exposing you to genius, and you resent that.
You see the size of that gun he fired at us? It was bigger than him.
I tried. I thought he appreciated it.
That's up your alley. I mean, what motivated you? Like, let's check. That was so out of the blue. I remember that movie really freaked us out. It really. We went back to our table at lunch and we were like, guys, you got to see this movie. I don't even know how to explain it. It blew our minds.
It really did. But the thing is, that trailer. I think the trailer and the ads on TV. They had that. They cut in that scene of John Travolta and Sam Jackson like shooting. Like firing their guns at that guy in the chair, right? You know how it goes from like that haze, like you see them in focus, and it goes that orange haze, and cuts to the other guy. For some reason, that just spoke to me. Like that just dug into my little brain, and I was like, I must see this. For some reason, I'd never seen anything like it, and it just called to me, and I was like, I must see this in the theater.
We should be fucking dead, man.
I know, we was lucky.
No. That shit wasn't luck.
Yeah, maybe.
This was divine intervention.
Tom Waits would refer to that as the needle running into the red. So that scene, it's not really a white out so much as it's like a orange red out, but there's something sort of messy and splattery about that scene, which does, I think I can see some of that in your work, where you're using, I don't know if you're flicking the pen or incorporating the messiness to evoke a kind of energy,
organized chaos.
Oh, totally. Yeah. Well, for me, when I'm making a drawing, a painting, or now even comic pages, like even my comic work is starting to have that, and it's really exciting for me. It's something. It's motion. It's uncontrollable. It's like it might sound cheesy, but like when I'm really in it, when I'm really drawing and creating, I do feel like I am just a vessel. I am just like a means for something greater than me, greater than all of us, to just get out and be seen. And so when I'm like flicking paint like that, and it's like sometimes I'll blow on a brush, or like I'll get a marker really wet with paint and just blow on it and let it fly across the page and see what happens. For me, it's just really letting the beast out, just let the word go, and when people see it, it's organized, but it's so chaotic, it just instantly gives energy to a piece. I've had pieces where I'm done and it's tight and it's clean and lovely, and I'm just like, what's missing here? And then I'll just flick, just whip paint across it, clear across the piece, and I'm like, there you go. For me, it almost gives it a life, because it's not something I planned. It's not something, I penciled this and then I rendered it very tightly in ink. This is like, I was just feeling it. The music was hot. The moment was good, and I just threw some paint down. I literally threw paint, and so that's kind of that's some of what it is for me.
Is there a structure underneath all of this? Do you literally still sketch outlines and that sort of thing, or does it all just kind of flow out of you?
I'll do sketches. I go back and forth, because like you mentioned about like being partially a cartoonist, I do feel like, it's nice to just have a shorthand that you can just whip out like right away in ink. So it's kind of a back and forth. Like I will pencil out pieces, sometimes really meticulously, but I always have to pull back and kind of just let the drawing be what it's going to be.
Is there a difference? Is there kind of a consciousness shift that occurs when you work in, I don't know if you can call it different mediums, but maybe it is different mediums. When we're working in comics versus working in production for TV, or when you're doing fine art, is there some sort of shift within you that occurs?
The further I've gotten along, and the more I've become comfortable in my own style, my own approach, the less I try to let that shift control me. Like I can control the shift, especially with animation. I mean, like I'm a character designer on a Disney XD show called Randy Cunningham, Ninth Grade Ninja.
For 800 years, Norrisville High has been protected by a ninja. No one knows that every 4 years, a new warrior is chosen. Go ninja! A freshman to fight the forces of evil. I am the ninja. I am Randy Cunningham.
And that has a very specific style. It has it has its own visual language, and I have to speak that language when I sit down in my Cintiq. So there, it's, you know, it has to be. But when it comes to doing a painting versus a comic page, I just try not to let the medium shift my gears for me. Because back earlier in my career, when I would do a painting, I'd be crazy, yay! But then I'd sit down and do a comic page, and I'm like, this is how you draw a comic page. You pencil. You draw your borders with the ruler. Now you ink it. And it was very... it was cool to start with, but I think over the years, it got stunted. You know, I started just drawing, I think, what was expected of me because I was drawing a comic. And so now, and I actually noticed that in like the latter 2000s, like 2007, 2008, and I was like, you know what, I should stop. I should stop for a while. I took a 2-year break from comics. I did fine art shows. I kind of just got back in touch with like the beast, the fine art side of me, and now I'm able to bring that to my comics and not feel like these handcuffs are going on me every time I sit down to draw a panel or a page. How do
you deal with the it seems like there is a perceived hierarchy of art forms, that fine art paint, well, what's displayed in a gallery is more important than what's printed on a page or what is used in production or something. How do you deal with that perception, or deal with that stigma that seems to exist in the world? Or is that stigma dissolving?
Oh, wow, that's an interesting question. That's a really good one. I feel like the stigma exists. I feel like will always exist as long as there are people who have those views. Like, there are people who think that galleries and museums are the end-all be-all. But as someone who's shown in galleries and lots of galleries and group shows and solo shows, I honestly don't. When you see behind the veil, you realize, you know, oh, the wizard's just this guy. You know, it's all very touchable. It's all very grounded. You know, and the hierarchy stuff, I feel like it's just, if those galleries, those museums, those places and people exist, but that's their world. And, you know, if their world doesn't vibe with me, I just don't really try to be a part of it. There's no insult to them. It's just, for me, the hierarchies are shattered in my head, at least, because I see so much art everywhere. I mean, I think about, like, growing up in the 80s, you know, and even being, like, a teenager in the 90s, it's like you see, there just wasn't as much stuff around, you know. Artists didn't have their own websites, you know. You had to approach a gallery and hope they would allow you to show in their halls. But now it's like you can literally rent a studio space and just throw a huge party and put some art on the walls, you know. And that existed in the 80s. I mean, kids were doing that in New York in like the early 80s scene, you know, like Keith Haring, Jean-Michel Basquiat. Like, people were. That's always been happening, but now I feel like it's happening on such a broad scale.
I mean, you can get it all over the internet, and then you can do an art show, and then
there's exposure that, you know, wasn't available back in the day.
Yeah,
so.
Exactly.
I kind of wonder about that. Do you ever worry about oversaturation now that it seems that now?
Oh, that's the other side of it,
right?
Yeah.
Now it seems like there's more opportunity to be an artist, but there are also more artists out there. So is that? You know, and it seems like a double-edged sword. It seems like, you know, how is that? Do you feel like you're existing in a sea of artists? Do you feel like is it more competitive? What does that mean out there?
I think it's a mix of all of that. It is oversaturation. It is like a crowded scene. But the thing is that at the base level, if you're a part of any scene, like at any skill level, really, if you're a part of the scene and you're putting your work out there, you're getting on walls, you're self-publishing a magazine, or you're working professionally, you're a part of the conversation. You know, you might not get worldwide attention, but as far as your city is concerned, as far as like your couple fans across the country are concerned, you are a working artist, you know. And I feel like some of the expectations when people are like doing gallery shows or putting out comics or whatever is tied up in some old, like maybe like 50s through 90s idea of what fame is. But I feel like now, like the older I get, the more I'm less concerned with fame, and I just kind of want to keep creating. You know, it's like as long as I have like a core of people who appreciate what I do, and even if it's just my friends who are like, oh, that's a cool piece, then I'm out there. I'm doing it. You know, I think like when I was first starting, I really was like, oh, I want to be known. I want to be known for doing this stuff. And you have this big. I was like, you know, like late teens, early 20s, so I had this nebulous idea of what it was to even be known or have fans. So, but now as I'm older, it's like I have a couple people who will like always want to buy a print if I put it out, or who will hit me up on Facebook and be like, oh, I dig this piece. And it's like, oh, that's cool. You know?
That's the validation. Yes.
Yeah. It's you learn to appreciate, like you get a longer view, and you just learn to appreciate the moments, not this huge epic thing that you thought was going to happen. You know.
I was just going to say, it seems like if you chase fame as a way of giving yourself some sense of whether you're accomplished or not, that seems like a dangerous. I don't know. It seems like a dangerous road to go down.
Yeah, because who's the ultimate arbiter of that? You know?
And fame can be fleeting, and you know, I don't. Fame does not necessarily equate to substance.
No, it doesn't. And careers are very long, and you will, or they can be if you're fortunate. A career can be long, and you will have good months and good years, and you will have terrible years.
Yeah, the lean years.
You know, it's up and down, and it's not. There's a great quote on a De La Soul song about that, on Rock Cocaine Flow, at the end of the Grind Date album. Anyone can handle being hot, but you know, it's about if you can handle being cold or not. Paraphrasing it, but yeah, it's just like when I had initial success in my career, that was cool. It was fun and exciting, but the times that really made me in my career were when things weren't going well, when I had to like adjust and change.
We'll return after these messages.
In a world gone mad, where the creative impulse had died, 3 men, a scholar, a warrior,
and a cartoonist,
banded together to stand tall in the face of creative tyranny. Prepare for the adventure of a lifetime. The Creative Impulse Podcast. Can you talk a little bit about what the LA art scene is like, or what it's like living out in LA versus, you know, the time you spent in Buffalo, the time you spent in Columbus, and you were in Milwaukee for a while also?
Mm-hmm. I lived in San Francisco for several years, and then I lived in Oakland for about a year and a half.
You know, you moved around a lot. I remember we talk, and you're always saying you're moving. What is it like in these different scenes, and what does it mean to be a part of these communities in the West Coast versus, you know, on the East Coast, or in some place that isn't known, a place like Buffalo or a place like Cleveland?
Yeah, well, Buffalo, it's nuts because I'm really curious about the Buffalo scene right now because I feel like there's a kinship between Buffalo and Detroit, where you have like industrial cities that have fallen on bad economic times, but you have all of a sudden you have affordable housing and affordable studio and warehouse space, where artists can come in, and I just think it's a huge potential for growth. I feel like these smaller cities that might not get as much clout or attention, or just have a bad rap for crime and, you know, poverty. I feel like art is a part of what is going to eventually lift these cities back up on their feet, because artists need inspiration, you know. And I remember when I lived in Columbus, I took a photo class, and I would walk around like the industrial side of Columbus and just take pictures of stuff, you know. And it was really inspiring. I'm just out in this, like, it's the weekend, so no one's at these factories. It's just like basically industrial wasteland, and I'm like, it's so epic. It's almost like going to another world, and you're just in Central Ohio, you know. So I think Buffalo. I'm very curious about it. I know, and we actually know a gentleman who moved to John Jennings. He moved to Buffalo to, like, you know, to teach and to like explore like the art scene there. So anyway, let's see. The Midwest was. Sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say logistics don't have a monopoly in art. It's interesting. How would you define art? I'm just curious about that, because the episode we're about to run before this one, I think we all struggled with, you know, assigning some sort of meaning to what art actually, what it is. What does it mean to you?
To me, it's just...
It's a big one.
Wow. Yeah, it is.
Like, how do you distinguish what is art from what is not art?
In 3 words.
Oh, yeah.
Go.
3 words or less.
Well, the answer is going to change, you realize, like, in 2
in 10
hours.
minutes,
I'll have a totally different answer.
Yeah.
But for me, honestly, art is just it's just expression. It's expression given form. You know, it's like modern dance to me is art. Painting and drawing, all the traditional things are art. You know, photography, filmmaking. But there's poetry. There's philosophy. I mean, sometimes I think, like, I'll listen to someone just craft a sentence. I listen to the way people talk sometimes, and I'm like, that is like an art form. Like, they're just so powerfully eloquent. And I don't know, but I do feel like it's a focused thing. I feel like art isn't something you just randomly do. I feel like art is something where you sit down and you, like, focus at least some part of your energies, and you're like, I'm going to do this. And at the end, you have a product. You have something. You know, cooking. I mean, look at food. I mean, people are making food that's so beautiful you don't even want to eat it. It's just like, I'd hate to ruin that beautiful.
I'll find a way to eat it.
You know?
I'd love to eat.
Yeah, and then you eat it. but yeah, to put a cap on it, I think that art is just human expression given form, and that form can be so many different things.
One thing, more specifically, could you talk a little bit about your live art? That's something that I think is really cool that you do, and something I'd like to do myself one day.
What is live art? Well, at its most fundamental, live art is when an artist chooses to make work directly in front of the audience in space and time. So instead of making an object or an environment, a painting for example, and leaving it for the audience to encounter in their own time, live art comes into being at the actual moment of encounter between the artist and spectator.
Oh, I love it. I love live art. And the thing is for me, live art was, I saw people doing it, like in Arizona, my friend Jim Mahfood. I saw photographs and, like, I saw stories about him doing it, and I always wanted to do it. And so I started doing it with some friends in I think, Columbus, Ohio? Or maybe, I think my first show was in Chicago. And then, that was it. I did it in Chicago, and then when I lived in Milwaukee, some buddies and we would do live art. But then I started traveling and doing it at comic conventions. And that was when I hooked up with Mahfood, and we started, he, I guess, invited me into his, like, live art team. And so, but I love it. For me, it's the closest I'll get to being in a band. Like, it's weird. When I'm up there, I'm not nervous. Like, I'm not one of those guys who's afraid to draw in front of people. So for me, it's just, holy smokes, I get to paint, and there's a crowd, you know, and there's music, and people are drinking, there's beautiful women. Could
you actually describe an event for our listeners, just to give them a sense of what it looks like?
And the beautiful women, too.
And focus on, spend a little time on that, too. Yeah, good point.
Well, there's one girl.
Yeah.
No. Well, for those who don't know, live art is it's typically done back when I started, it was done at, like, clubs and bars, while DJs spin records, and sometimes while bands play. We would set up, like, wooden panels or something, like a little artist area, and then we'll tack up. We'll have these huge wooden, like, plywood sheets, and we'll tack up canvases or cardboard, mat board, whatever we had, really. And we'll just do paintings live. Like, so the band is there playing, or the DJ spinning records. There's a dance floor. There's people drinking and milling about, and then we're just kind of another part of the performance. We're another part of the event. And that was where it started for me. But then, I mean, one of the biggest shows I was a part of, myself and I think 7 other artists, we all rotated doing live paintings throughout this venue, this huge, like, almost like theater type venue at an MF Doom show. And it was one of the biggest live art shows I ever did. It was earlier in my career, and it was just nuts because we had, like, we had 2, like, art areas upstairs, like on the balcony area. We had one on either side of the stage, and we were just rotating back and forth. And I ended up, like, I'm painting next to Jim on stage next to MF Doom. And he's, like, running around the stage, rapping, singing. People are screaming and yelling, and I'm just right on stage at a huge rap show painting. And so that was an epic time. And now, I mean, I've done so many different styles of shows. Like, we've done them at galleries, we've done them at film events, like there'll be private parties for some release or some magazine. and you're just, oh, there's a pool party, and then we're in this corner painting, you know.
Have any of these events been filmed? I mean, can people see this anywhere? Any of these?
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes, certainly. It's funny, I can't really think of a website off the top of my head, but I know people have definitely, like, recorded them. We just did one at an event out here called Eat Your Art Out, and it's like a fundraiser for a local Derby Girl team. But that was, I think there should be some footage, or at least lots of photographs from that online.
So it must be really satisfying to be able to incorporate the performance element into the art, because you start off as a visual artist, but then this whole aspect of performance gets pulled into it as well.
Oh, certainly, yeah. It's another level. It's not for everybody. I know people who get up there and they're just not into it. Or I've been to art shows where people literally are drawing with like Sharpies on a big white board, and I'm just like, okay, I'm gonna just throw some paint. I remember I told the girl once, like, she was wearing this really beautiful dress and she was drawing with Sharpies, and I was like, you realize I'm gonna get paint all over your dress. And then she got terrified. I was like, I'm kidding, you know, I'll control myself. That was an MTV party. Wow, God, that was years ago.
Is hip hop a big part of your world and the art you produce? You know, is that, because I notice that more, and I'm seeing that more and more in the work you do and in the world that you're in. Is that in that scene? Hip hop was connected to the art scene back in the '80s. Basquiat and all that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and all that. I mean, back in the day when hip hop first formed, I mean, it was like the DJ, the MC, the breakers, and the painters, like the graffiti guys. You know, so yeah, the elements of hip hop. I feel like it's always going to have some tie, at least in my head, to visual art. But for me, it's really all music. It's music and it's people. It gets a little deeper and hippy dippy-ish, but like, especially with the live art, it's really the people, like, are at the base of all of it, because if they're feeling it, it's great. You know, I mean, there's a show I do whenever I go to Vancouver. We'll do live art at this one venue, and it's just it's not like an extravagant place. It's a really cool bar, but it's not like some auditorium or some like hoity-toity spot. It's just like, yo, this is a chill bar to go to and eat some really good food, you know, and they have a stage, you know, they have DJs, and for some reason when it all comes together, it's like, we're on this really cool stage, we're well lit, they always set it up perfectly for us, and then, you know, I'll need to go and use the bathroom, and I'm walking through the crowd with like paint all over my hands, my face, I'm just a mess, I'm sweating, and there will be like just the coolest people, like of all ages, like men, women, boys, girls, like just like, hey, good work, man, that's cool, you know, if the crowd's feeling it and they're paying attention, there's something about it, you know. It's like if we were just doing up there painting and there was no one around, we'd probably stop painting and just drink and cry.
Just drink and cry, I like that.
Yeah, but having the people there, it makes it, for me, it's everything. The music gets the people dancing, the art gives them something cool to look at.
Your beginnings, I mean, it seemed like you could have gone down an academic track. It sounds like you have there's a real cerebral, intellectual part of your process. When you're working, you know, what part of you is driven by, you know, that cerebral, okay, I know what I want to do, I know where I'm going, and what part of it is like more that Zen quality where I'm just feeling this and it feels right? You talked about that a little bit earlier when you started, you know, splattering the canvas. It's like, okay, now it's coming alive. When you're talking about doing this live art, it seems like, for me, I guess when I'm hearing this, I'm thinking that you're just feeling it. You're fully like engaged more on an emotional level. Is there a difference there between when you're in your studio and, you know, when you're in a live art event? And could you talk a little bit about your process there in terms of like how intellectual you get with your pieces?
Yeah, certainly. It's honestly, it's a mix. It's kind of a blend. It's almost like a flight. It's like, imagine flying a plane like a jumbo jet, and you go through all your like technical setup stuff when you start, and you take off and you put it on autopilot. You know, once you get off the ground, it's just a matter of having the autopilot on and checking your cages and just, you know, being aware. But you're not. It's on a more pedestrian level. It's like driving. You know, when you're driving like cross country on a freeway, you're not always thinking about the rules and the mechanics of driving. Eventually, you know, you get on a long stretch of highway and you're just like, okay, stay in my lane, pass this slow jerk, you know, like...
It becomes ingrained.
Yeah, exactly. And for me, that's what creating art is like. It's like when I'm starting a piece, I'm writing, I'm like a comic story, I'm writing and I'm penciling, but eventually I just kind of can let go. It's like once I'm on track, once I've been at my desk for like half an hour to an hour, then I'm just flowing, you know, I'm just in the zone. And yeah, so it really is a blend of both. You know, once you're in the zone, you just fly, you know, you'll surprise yourself at how much you get done, you know. I've had times before where I'm painting, and painting, I feel like it's a lot easier to get into that zone, that more like just cerebral, like, hey, I'm not worried about anything anymore. Because I've had painting moments where I'm watching myself paint. I'm not.
It's out of body.
About it.
It's an out of body.
Yeah.
Wow.
This was divine intervention.
It happened a lot when I was learning how to paint. Like, I really figured out how to paint the summer after I graduated college. And I just remember, like, being stunned because pieces that I would have ruined a month before, I was just like, and now I'm adding this green, or now I'm mixing this color, and not even thinking about it, just doing it. It's really bizarre, but it's a beautiful place to get to, that zone.
The Creative Impulse Podcast, used only as directed.